and welcome to the Good Life podcast with me, Sabine Pusch.
And me, Robert Keeling.
So this time we are going to be looking at citizens' assemblies. Have you ever been a part of a citizens' assembly, Rob?
Well, I went to one just before the election in the UK, which was really energising. And I came away, pretty inspired by how they can work in the UK context. And I've heard about how they're used in Germany as well a little bit.
So who have we got here to tell us a little bit more then? Can you introduce our guests, please?
Well, I'll let Tim Hall introduce himself as well, but Tim and I know each other a little bit and had some really interesting conversations about some of the basically political science, I guess, behind some of this. And then we also have Kerstin Lücker, who works in Berlin and, as we'll be hearing later, has also helped organise citizens' assemblies, or Bürgerräte, as I think they're called in German, on her side.
Okay, so shall we start with you, Tim, here in the UK? Can you just tell me a little bit about citizens' assemblies and what you're trying to achieve with them?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the invite. That's good to be here this afternoon. I work for Citizens UK. We're a civic alliance. That's an alliance of civil society organisations, basically. Everything that's not part of the state or the private sector. And basically we exist to support people to make change in their communities, find common purpose with others, civic institutions like schools, faith communities, trade unions, third sector organisations is really key. There's kind of really key sites for which people can find common purpose with others and win change. We do a lot of assemblies in citizens, a lot of assemblies. And we're structured in terms of chapters. So we've got 20 chapters up and down the country. And, each chapter will do maybe 2-3 a year.
So can you just explain what a chapter is and how you work that out? What is it, regional? Is it sector by sector? How do you work that out?
Yeah, good question. We're structured around place. So for example, I'm an organiser in Cambridge, and that can be churches, mosques, synagogues, universities, schools, colleges, youth charities, a range of different institutions that would join and form part of a civic alliance or a chapter. We call them accountability assemblies. So they're going to be slightly different, I think, from the work that Kerstin is doing with that.
Yeah. No, I was gonna interrupt you there because I wanted to ask Kerstin if this is similar in Germany. Ist das auch so in Deutschland? Macht ihr das auch so ähnlich oder nicht?
I don't think so. I think there might be the term for what we do in English, mini publics. That's how it's often referred to in research on citizens' assemblies. I've just been to an international congress in a worldwide network, Democracy, Development and Research. They do citizens' assemblies all over the world and people meet. And actually what we call a citizens' assembly is a very standardized process, so it's very formalized, it's very clear and very similar all over the world how it is done. And it is, I think, different from what Tim is talking about. We form a body of people, randomly selected citizens. We find them by drawing the lot, for example, from the citizens of Berlin. It depends on which governmental level the citizens' assembly takes place. It can be within a small community, it can be citywide, it can be nationwide. We even had citizens' assemblies on the EU level. But the process, it's always very much alive. So citizens who take part in it are invited by usually by mail, and then they can register, and we always try to use an algorithm that allows us to form a body that's kind of representative for the whole citizenship. For example, if we have 20% migrants living in Berlin, then we would try to have 20% migrants in our citizens' assembly of, let's say, 50 or 100 people. There are also various sizes, but the process is very, very standardized.
So it sounds kind of quite similar to the way in which one would do polling. Is that true?
I'm not sure. I mean, the idea of the Citizens' Assembly is opposed to, for example, referenda or these kind of things, that people are guided through informed discussions. And they actually meet with expert knowledge. So they do not just discuss their opinions on something, but they get lots of expert inputs on as much as possible and as best as possible state-of-the-art knowledge, for example, on climate change or on possibilities how to shape sustainable mobility in a city. And then based on that expert knowledge, they are guided through discussions. And the idea is for them to make informed decisions on certain future policies. And that's very different from for example, referenda, where people usually are not really informed, or there's more like manipulation and promotion and all this kind of stuff going on.
So
lies if you take Brexit, for example.
I was just about to mention, I was trying not to mention Brexit actually, but yeah, it's tempting. It's very tempting.
But that's a very different thing. That the idea is really that they go through these very deep discussions on the topic they are making decisions about.
Is this in person or do you do it virtually?
It is usually in person. There has been a huge change when the pandemic came up, because of course during the pandemic we had to switch to online citizens' assemblies, and there's also research on how that shapes a citizens' assembly's outcome and what's the difference. Now, I think both is being done. For example, the federal state of Baden-Württemberg, one of our 16 federal states, they decided to do, 90% online. And we think, for example, that's going too far because it really changes the whole process. And the most interesting thing about the whole Citizens' Assembly process, because it's going over at least 4 days, sometimes even 12 days of sessions, for example. Wow. And what happens is that really people start to understand that people with other opinions have reasons for their opinions. So it's really helpful to overcome these, often deep differences. And this effect is much less in online citizens' assemblies. It happens much less in online citizens. That's one of the things we can definitely say after evaluating what we did during the pandemic.
Okay, so going back to you, Tim, again, so that does sound quite different to what you're doing, doesn't it? Because you're actually working with people who are already quite engaged in their communities, I would suggest. Would that be fair?
You're right, it is quite different. I think what Kerstin is talking about is deliberative assemblies in a way, kind of like juries, citizen juries, really, that come and form an opinion around an issue over certain days. Ours are accountability assemblies. We would never take an issue to our communities. It's always people before programme for us. So, for example, we did a youth assembly in Cambridge the other week, and we go out to schools and colleges and say, "What's putting you under pressure? What's frustrating you? What's making you angry?" And they have conversations. We give them the tools to kind of explore this. So they then bring their own issues forward. We then say what we would do then is cut an issue, what we would describe as cutting an issue, and that's develop asks that are both worthwhile and winnable. So for example, there'll be a problem in the bus network in Cambridge, and then they then work out who they want to build a relationship with, who has the power, if you like, to affect that change. And then they will then organise the assembly themselves, and they will have the power holder on stage. They will have the mayor on stage responding, and they will say, will you work with us to on X, Y, and Z. The difference, I would say, and this is a bit of a provocation for Kerstin, is it doesn't take power out of play, because, deliberative assemblies, it always depends on someone acting on the decision that deliberation, results in or not. That's never taken for granted for us. It's always, someone in a position of power. That could be the Deputy Prime Minister or the Mayor. Will you work with us on X, Y, and Z? Will you meet with us in 6 months' time to, review how we're getting on this, etc.? So I guess that's a useful distinction. I think accountability assemblies, deliberative assemblies, there's almost certainly more.
I'm not sure I quite understand the difference, actually, being not a political scientist.
You're basically holding people in positions of power and public office to account. That's not born of cynicism. That comes from, recognition that someone that goes into politics, needs to organise civil society in order to get their agenda through as well. So we've developed strong partnerships with people in public office.
And Tim, if I could just ask you, because I'm very interested in what citizens' assemblies tell you or tell one about life in sort of at large, whether it's Berlin or London or other places. Would you say from the work you've done, is there much of a difference between towns around the UK and London, or do the conversations feel different? Is there more? Do you find more accountability kind of firming up when you've done them in the capital as opposed to elsewhere, or is that too simplistic?
It's a good question. We, as an organisation, we're structured regionally, and yet, the structure of decision making is quite centralised. So we need to act nationally as well, and that means very often, working up our priorities, across 20 different chapters. There are common things. There are themes that come up again and again at the current time. Cost of living comes up again, housing comes up, climate comes up as well, mental health comes up. But there are also things that are different. At our youth assembly, young people wanting to act on biodiversity. Well, it comes under climate, obviously, but, that issue is not something that, people are necessarily acting on across the country. So every chapter is different.
So Kerstin, how can you explain to me as an outsider, how is it different than in Berlin, the way you do it in Germany, to what Tim's describing?
I think it's two very different things we are talking about, because it sounds to me like some kind of community work, what Tim does, and correct me if I'm wrong, and it sounds great. And also I think it seems to work more on a local level, where you can really forge close relationships between certain politicians and the community around it, right? And what we do is this more formalized process you can do as well as on a local level as on EU level. For example, we have citizens' assemblies that are really large also in numbers. That's very different. I think the advantage is that the process, because it's that much formalized, it guarantees certain, quality standards, let's say. But the whole thing, and also the maybe even what we want to achieve with it goes into a slightly different direction. Yeah, the idea is actually that because people feel that democracy mainly means they can go and vote every, 4 or 5 years, right? And otherwise they don't have any influence on what's happening and on political decision making. And with the citizens' assemblies, we are trying to kind of take the democracy a little further in that way, that we invite to go into these deliberative discussions. Of course, accountability is always a question, and it is definitely still a weak point. And it's something we are actually all over the world working on. We are trying, and it's not easy. You cannot say it does not work or it works. It works sometimes. It very depends on the circumstances. For example, it depends on who is commissioning a citizens' assembly. In a good case, we have, for example, in the city of Berlin, we have a senator for mobility and transport. She commissioned a citizens' assembly on climate change. And then she received the recommendations and of course promised the participants of the citizen assembly to act upon these recommendations as far as she's able to do that. Now, for example, in this case, the Citizens' Assembly took place in 2002, and we had to re-elect our Senate in Berlin because we had this messed up elections. I don't know if you have heard about it. Yeah. So this senator, who should have been in office 4 or 5 years, had lost her office, I don't know, after 1.5 years or something like that. So now she actually could not act upon the recommendations. And still, we are now trying, for example, to get her successor, the new Senator for Mobility, to at least, partly act upon these recommendations. So we are trying, to help politicians accountable.
Kerstin, can I ask, so as well as the democratic and engagement side, you were saying, you often have days of talking with the work you've been doing. You must hear from people in Berlin that often aren't heard from, or you must hear stories about people's lives which are quite different. Does it tell you a sort of stories about Berlin that you weren't aware of before?
Absolutely. Since we are trying to really have a representative body of people, you encounter all sorts of opinions and stories. It depends also very much on the topic.
If I just come in, that just points out the problem about power not being upfront in that way, because you've got a scenario in which, you've got the municipal government looking for a certain outcome from the citizen. And they're not getting that. So the whole question about power, which is front and centre for accountability assemblies, because the politician is on stage, being asked to say something publicly and then will be held to account. So what you get in an accountability assembly is power, played out in front of you. You have, so you will get, at our youth assembly, you had young people just sharing their experience of being reliant on buses. And then they will say, Mayor Johnson, will you work with us on X, Y, and Z? Or Mayor Johnson, will you set out what your hope is for buses? You've got 4 minutes. So it's their meeting. They've made all the running for this meeting. You'll have some time to talk about your ambitions, but then we're here to do business. So, we want, this route extended, or we want to sit on an oversight board which will give us kind of permanent ability to influence and shape the service in the city. It will be that. So it will be the power played out, the power, if you like, contest played out publicly rather than behind the scenes. But that's always the problem, it seems to me, with the deliberative model. But another thing as well is who gets to decide what issues are deliberated on. That's a key reason in a way, because if you get politicians say, well, we need a deliberative assembly on this issue, what you do is you take away the capacity of people to work up their own issues and prioritise for themselves. And again, just stepping out, one more thing, I'd like to put this on the table as well. Why are we doing this? In a way, one of the reasons is around powerlessness, isn't it? We know about the old adage that power corrupts, but powerlessness corrupts as well. Pervasive powerlessness corrupts and is exploitable, as we know, in Germany and in the UK. How is this a tool which is going to address pervasive and corrupting powerlessness, feelings of powerlessness.
I would say that if you have you can do both, can't you? I mean, you can have a citizens' assembly that talks about whether or not Tempelhof should be turned into a housing estate or not, and that's something that may be driven by a member of Parliament or a local governor. But you can also have the sort of assembly that I think you're suggesting, which is where you just get a group of people together and work through what it is that their concerns are.
You're right, you can have both. And, what I was saying in a nutshell is that the power is front and centre of what you see at an accountability assembly in the way that it might not be in a deliberative assembly. Is that a lot of governments are reaching for deliberative assemblies as ways to, address disaffection with politics. And I'm not sure they're the right tool for the job.
I have to jump in there because, for example, the Climate Change Citizens Assembly in Berlin was initiated by activists, grassroots activists, citizens of Berlin. It's not always the case that governments commission or initiate citizens' assemblies. On the contrary, there's all sorts of situations where this is not the case. I mean, the Tempelhofer case is a little difficult because it's really special, and it's not clear yet if the Senate really acts upon the results of the Citizens' Assembly. They might still just build some houses on the Tempelhofer Feld. But on the other hand, there are, like, for example, the Climate Change Citizens Assembly, which was a really, for Berlin-wide, really huge also Citizens Assembly with 100 participants, and I think they had 12 days or something like that. And it was initiated by citizens from Berlin, and they collected signatures and then handed them over to the senator, and then she said, okay, now we have to act upon it by law, actually, and commission the Citizens' Assembly. I'm just saying, I think we are we are having a very general discussion now, because accountability, for example, the possibility for a politician, for example, to be held accountable for his decisions decreases with the complexity and the level he acts upon, right? I mean, it's easier to do that on a community level with mayors and local politicians. It's harder. Of course, we could invite, for example, the Chancellor of Germany and tell him what are our issues and so on, but he will not be able to act upon it in the way he might wish to do if he was the only person to decide about politics in Germany, right? So we are at the moment a little, unclear about what we are talking about or what we are comparing, I think.
Sorry.
I just wanted to, this is so interesting, I just wanted to drill down a bit more and to Tim, your point about how powerlessness can corrupt. That's a really nice way to put it. I was wondering whether it's in the UK or in Germany, there are limits to who you invite to these assemblies, and are there limits to which you constrain opinions that people might want to express and that sort of stuff. And I'm inferring from your point, Tim, that the perils of populism are well established now, and the way that if you really want to reach out to people, though, you have to push the boundaries of what's kind of acceptable to talk about. Is that something you guys have wrestled with in either country?
Yes, I think deliberation does take place in accountability assemblies, but it takes place in a different way. If you like, not up front in the way that the play of power does. We recruit institutions into membership and support people to find common purpose. And people disagree. That will include, a mosque, that will join an alliance and saying, well, look, we're not going to do any campaigning on sexuality. And, on the other hand, we'd have a student union that is kind of primarily campaigning on gender and sexuality, etc. But what we say is to to just strategically leave your differences at the door and find something that you have in common, that you share. It could be, say, something like living wage, or acting on on housing or something like that. And that's not because your differences aren't important; they are. But our argument is, if you can act together over something that you have in common, then you're in a better place to talk about stuff that you disagree about.
And can I ask a question, Tim? I wonder how do you reach people who aren't members of mosques or student unions, or people who aren't generally very engaged in politics or in community? Because if you're only dealing with community associations or organisations, they're already quite engaged people, aren't they? I mean, how do you get outside of that?
Well, there's the challenge. Institutions are important, and they're important for holding to account. And, I take what you're saying, Kerstin, about representation and structure getting complicated the higher you go. Institutions are still important there for holding account at a high level over 5 to 10 years, which is sometimes what it takes, the amount of time it takes to win change.
Because, I mean, when I look, going back to my question, when you look at the American, election recently, it was won by people who were normally quite disengaged from politics, wasn't it? So how do you get them involved in something like this? How do you even start doing that? Do you have any ideas? Or
yes, it's very straightforward. I mean, you bring people together and work out what their interests are and share your self-interest. So that I hate Trump. I couldn't. We couldn't work with Trump, I don't think. I'm going to say that officially, etc. But I would very happily, go and organise in red states, and find out, just what's putting you under pressure, what's putting your family under pressure, what's frustrating you, what's holding you back. And that way, you support people to address that themselves. Mm. That's the issue about power, as it were.
So how do you find people from different, AFD voters?
Well, we actually, when people register, we collect lots of data, because otherwise we could not form a representative body of people. There's a lot going on because, of course, there is a tendency that more educated people register, other people get the invitation and just throw it into the trash bin. In German, we call it aufsuchendes Verfahren, for example. It means that people who do not react to the invitation, sometimes we call them, we write them emails or mail and ask them if we can address them again, if they would be willing to tell us why they would not take part in a citizens' assembly. And then we start working. Can we help you get, over whatever hinders you in taking part, over your fears, over your doubts, and so on. And it's very, very interesting, actually. We had, women who say it starts with, I have to take care of my children. I don't know how to do that. And we make sure that there will be childcare. There are people who have suffered from traumata who say, I cannot go into a room with lots of people. And then we say, what if there will be someone with you who will be at your side all the time? Would that make it easier for you to take part? So we are actually very aware of this problem. And we are trying to find ways to get around these problems. I could talk on and on about that. And we do have these discussions. We do have people with, for example, in the climate change citizens assemblies who are very strongly for keeping cars and keeping them traditionally with gas and so on. So we really do have these very controversial discussions.
When I went to the Citizens' Assembly in London a few months ago, Tim, I was very struck by the emphasis on civility. Actually, as a member of the audience, if I'd heckled any of the politicians being held to account, I would have been asked to leave. there was a little bit of sort of teeth sucking and a few, just the atmospherics. You could tell people were getting involved, but that's kind of normal. I think that's quite human. But I was really kind of really lifted up by the emphasis on civility and how we should listen to other people's points of view. It made me wonder whether just to play devil's advocate, whether you aren't then creating a kind of bubble or echo chamber, because the sort of people that do come to these things, if you hold beliefs which aren't hate crime and don't fall into the category of completely wacky, but are a bit kind of pushing on those boundaries, and they are things that are putting you under pressure, messing up your life a bit, I wonder whether there must be challenges to how you facilitate these things, to bring out a sort of saltiness to the discussion and real authenticity to it without then upsetting people. I don't know whether you've had any examples of that, either of you.
Yes, it does. I mean, we've, over the Gaza, we have synagogues and mosques in membership, and inflamed communities, frankly. So of course we're not immune to that, but we work relationally. So we build relations, between civic leaders. We spend a lot of time building relationships, and so they do, and they have sustained, even through a crisis like the Gaza war. But we're not immune to that. But I mean, remember, this is the assembly that you saw, Rob. That's their assembly. I mean, the people. I mean, they worked on that. They drafted their bits of their section, as it were. It's their assembly, so they don't want it to just kind of break down acrimoniously. It's a lot of work goes on to putting something like that on. So that's kind of how we guard against it.
I've got a question for both of you. What do you regard to be your greatest success through a citizens' assembly, and what is your ambition with citizens' assemblies? I'll start with you, Tim.
Making them part of public life in the UK. I mean, it's now becoming a kind of event in the general election cycle. In the last week of the campaign, or there or thereabouts, we hold, a large accountability assembly with, senior politicians from each party. So I would say making assemblies part of public life again. The work with the mayor around living wage and ensuring that the Olympic Games in London 2012 had a living wage legacy in terms of jobs. Has been a big win. I guess so. I'll stop there with living wage and just getting them into public life again.
What about you, Kerstin?
It's a difficult question. I would also say that the energy at the Citizens' Assembly is often really very, very almost overwhelming, I would say. People always ask us, can we continue in this group of people? And then we say, you have to organize yourself. Of course, you can. People form friendships, and we try actually to keep them. For example, we inform them on all kinds of possibilities to publicly engage. So actually, often it really sparks public engagement. And I find it very interesting how it changes, people's thinking. What I said in the beginning, I mean, it's very banal, and at the same time, it's very stunning when people meet very controversial opinions, and they begin to realize, this other person has a reason for why he thinks that way. And I strongly believe even people who vote for Trump or the AfD, that lots of them really have reasons for what they do. They might be in my opinion, disoriented about the decisions they make based on these reasons. But to hear about the reason and to understand that these people are people with needs and yeah, that's something I find very interesting. And I just wanted to say I find Tim's work super interesting, and I would love, the more you talk, Tim, I would love to learn actually about what you do and how you do it. And I'm now doing a citizens assembly in Ukraine, and it is very interesting, the first results we have had from the very first citizens assembly in Ukraine. Because it tells a lot about how trust is a problem in the society there, even more than in our societies and so on. And it's a very different situation. So I would really love to learn about your work more. And I don't know, think if we can take also some of what you do to Ukraine, for example. I don't know if we can come up with something.
I see a steady exchange taking shape, Kerstin. Me too. I'd love to come over and see firsthand the work you're doing there.
It seems like we've just done our own Berlin-London Citizens Assembly here. Thank you so much, all of you, for taking part in this. I mean, to me, as an outsider, this feels a very good antidote to the algorithms of social media that push people into their silos. And it's a really valuable work that you're all doing. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for me as well.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I think that the stuff you guys have talked about is a really important lens about how people feel at home in cities, and we've got a few sort of hooks from today's discussion to pick up on there. So no, thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Okay, so this is Sabine and Rob having a little chat after our interview with Kerstin and Tim. So Rob, I just wanted to say I found it really interesting. It felt to me like the German style, maybe this is my inner German coming across here, but I felt that was a more results-based type of approach. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I was struck by Tim's the way that he explains the patience and the groundwork which Citizens UK do their work. He uses a nice expression called weaving trust, which is where they really bring people together and just get them to talk and learn to trust each other. And it's no surprise that has to work face to face. That's a thing in society which it's been lost a little bit recently. I think the lead-in times are really long. I know from Citizens UK's work, but then it is also based around getting accountability from decision makers who are powerful.
I wasn't clear, was in a citizens' assembly like the one you went to, was there a politician there? Was there a person of power in the room?
Yeah, it was very much a thing. So there were 3 from all the mainstream parties, politicians who were being, it was a little bit, it's very stage managed, but in a good way. They're very much put on the spot and asked to make commitments, or maybe not make commitments to issues which collectively the audience have talked through and deliberated through. It was quite obvious when I saw it, the ones who were really up for making a firm commitment and ones which in true style gave a slightly more slippery commitment, or on occasion just said, that isn't something I would do were I to be in power. And that's quite powerful in its own right. And trying to tease out that clarity, I think it's really interesting. I think on your point about on the German side, it's definitely, it probably is a bit more structured. I thought the example of Tempelhof Airport, which has been a kind of running source for as long as I can remember, is a really interesting one to watch, because as Kerstin pointed out, this puts the Senat or the City Hall in a bit of a bind. They asked a question and they didn't quite get the answer they wanted. And that's the kind of the core of then how, where do you go from there?
Yeah, and that does then say, well, where's the accountability and how much power do we have over the people who run the show? And And I think one of the things I was interested in is how much power the local government has and money the local government has in Berlin compared to the London mayor, because I think it is quite different, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's also really the crux of the issue here. So Berlin is a federal state in its own right, and I believe the Senate has considerable powers on how Berlin is developed. That doesn't mean Berlin has been a success story in development. I think even people who love Berlin would realise that it's had some real bumps on the road over the last decade or so. Not least because of the challenges of the city starting to stand on its own 2 feet and so on as a capital. But and London is famously basically less organised and the mayor has less decision-making powers. But I'm sure there's also just there's probably a bit of a cultural side there. Berlin is also politically probably a bit more radical than London. You know, the punk movement, the kind of the massive fissure that still goes through the city between east and west, and just some of the kind of political, intellectual currents of thinking, good and bad, are just really different in Berlin than in London, and that you see, I'm sure, coming through a lot of this.
I mean, I was also really struck by how Kerstin chose the participants of her Citizens' Assembly, and that it was really random and actually just finding individuals rather than going through existing institutions, which I felt like was rather good, actually. I quite like that.
Yeah, she didn't pick up on your point about comparing it to polling, but it did feel a bit like that. And the way that, a little bit like with jury service, or, you know, you basically have to have a very good reason not to do this. And I think that's a really nice counterpoint to the point that, like, are these things self-selecting? If you go to a citizens' assembly, although yes, you may be part of an association on some level and therefore might get sort of roped into it, you still have to go to it, and that will, I think, attract people with at least some common framework of thinking. You know, if you're one of these people that believes in really alternative realities or totally alternative, your reference points are totally different, then you're going to struggle. And so if you're put on the spot and invited to one of these citizens' assemblies in Germany, then yeah, you may either turn up out of mischief, I suppose, and decide to kind of stir things up a little bit. And that was part of behind my question about what do you do if people use this as a platform to express their views, which might not be very nice. How do you work around some of that?
What do you mean, in the German context or in both contexts?
Well, both, I guess. But, you know, if you're picked as a lottery kind of winner to come to one of these events, then you know, you've got a good reason to go.
A conspiracy theorist could potentially steal all the oxygen, you're saying?
For example, or throw things off course, or introduce a bunch of reference points which just don't fit the kind of reality of what the social issues that people are facing are.
Great, thanks. See you next time.
Thank you.